Welcome to the debate. Today, we're delving into the shadowy corners of M.R. James's ghost stories of an antiquary. It's a truly renowned collection, isn't it? Full of these chilling, inexplicable phenomena, spectral visits, cursed objects, things that have, really captivated readers for, generations.
Indeed. It's a collection rich in these unsettling occurrences, ambiguous events that definitely stick with you.
Right. So our central question today is this. Are the terrifying events in these stories, the spectral figures, the malevolent guardians, are they truly manifestations of the supernatural, or are they driven by genuine otherworldly forces? Now, I'm going to argue that the evidence within these narratives, it strongly suggests authentic supernatural intervention. It really pushes the boundaries of, what our rational minds can easily accept.
Okay, and I'll be putting forth the argument that while these stories are, yes, undeniably unsettling and incredibly powerful, a closer, maybe more critical look reveals something else. Human psychology, deeply ingrained cultural superstitions, maybe even misinterpretations of natural events. These, I think, provide a more consistent and frankly more credible framework for understanding these quote-unquote ghost stories. James's genius, I believe, really lies in how he exploits these very human vulnerabilities.
Okay, well, let me start then. For me, the sheer volume and the internal consistency of the inexplicable across these accounts, it demands a supernatural explanation. What James masterfully achieves here isn't just a scare. It's a profound comment on how readily our rational minds can just, collapse when faced with the truly inexplicable. It suggests a universe far less orderly than we maybe prefer. Take Deniston's experience in Canon Alberic's scrapbook. The sacristan, who's clearly traumatized, he reveals, "Deux fois je l'ai vu, mille fois je l'ai senti. Twice I have seen him, 1,000 times I have felt him." That indicates a long-standing, tangible terror. And this is then followed by Deniston's own terrifying physical assault by a demonic entity whose hand mirrored the drawing, leaving him screaming, as James puts it, with the voice of an animal in hideous pain.
Now, that seems like a concrete, shared reality, not just some figment of imagination.
And similarly, look at Mr. Abney in Lost Hearts. His meticulous documentation of absorbing psychic portions, it directly culminates in his brutal death. A terrible lacerated wound exposing the heart, apparently inflicted by the very ghosts of the children he victimized. I mean, these aren't merely psychological quirks. They feel like tangible, deadly manifestations of dark forces. Okay, I see why you'd lean towards that conclusion. I do. But let me offer a different lens. What we often get in James are individuals in, let's say, extreme psychological states, or narratives filtered through fear. Deniston himself, remember, he initially wondered if the sacristan had a fixed delusion, or a guilty conscience, or was maybe just an unbearably henpecked husband. Those vivid descriptions, while, incredibly impactful, are recounted by people already predisposed to fear, or maybe obsessive scholarly pursuits, which is a common character type for James. And in Lost Hearts, the coroner, the official explanation, attributed Abney's death to a wild creature. A perfectly natural, though tragic, explanation for that kind of physical wound. Abney's own papers, his receipt for power, they read like the obsessive writings of a frankly deluded occultist. His profound guilt or paranoia could easily manifest as perceived attacks by these psychic portions, leading to a violent end, maybe even self-inflicted in the state of terror. James's genius, I think, is exploiting the mind's existing frameworks of fear and superstition. He shows how internal vulnerabilities can project outwards as terrifying external realities. That makes the psychological horror perhaps even more chilling than a, simple ghost.
That's an interesting point about individual perspective, yes. But I'd frame it differently. The corroboration of uncanny events by multiple people, often people who start out skeptical, that significantly undermines a purely psychological reading, doesn't it? I mean, if it's all in the head, what accounts for specific, shared motifs, like objects causing definite, shared malevolent encounters. Take the mezzotint. Mr. Williams, he initially finds the engraving quite ordinary, but its dynamic movement, changing from a black blot to a crawling shape, then entering the house, finally carrying a child. This is observed and documented consistently by several people. Professor Banks, Mr. Garwood, Mr. Nisbet. These aren't isolated delusions. They're shared observations of a physically changing image, and it directly correlates with the real-world disappearance of the Anningley Hall heir and the father's death later on. And the picture stops changing after the child is carried off. That seems to imply a direct malevolent agency influencing both the art and reality.
See, I find that explanation difficult to fully accept, especially when you consider the conditions under which these observations happen. Yes, multiple people see the mezzotint, but their perceptions are often influenced by suggestion, or they occur in situations ripe for misinterpretation. Mr. Binks, for instance, he needs prompting from Williams to even discern a figure in the first place. The initial black blot, evolving, that could easily be a classic case of pareidolia, where our minds naturally seek patterns and ambiguity, seeing faces in clouds, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And subsequent observations might then be colored by this initial framing, or by knowing the local legends about the missing heir. And the dismissal by the Sadducean professor of ophiology, James often uses characters like that to represent stubborn skepticism, right? His dismissal, all those Bridgeford people will say anything, that highlights how these narratives can build on suggestion, not necessarily verifiable fact. The correlation with the disappearance is certainly evocative, I grant you, but the picture itself could just be a macabre representation of an existing local tragedy, not an active, supernatural portal.
But what about cases where the entities aren't just visual illusions, where they exert undeniable physical force, leave tangible marks, or elicit this profound, unignorable terror in multiple witnesses? In the ash tree, you have Mrs. Mothersoul's specific curse, "There will be guests at the hall," and it's followed by 2 successive Sir Matthews dying dead and black in the same room, one with 2 small punctures. Sir Richard complains about noises and scratches that the Bishop of Kilmore actually proves cannot be coming from tree branches. Then the discovery of those enormous, gray-haired, spider-like creatures, one identified as the remains of a woman, presumably Mothersoul, inside the burning tree, that directly links the accused witch, the ominous tree, and the mysterious deaths with a horrifying physical reality. That isn't subjective, surely. It argues for a terrifying visceral truth. And let's take another example of objective phenomena. Number 13. Anderson's personal experiences, okay, maybe subjective initially, but Herr Jensen, the lawyer, objectively hears horrible singing from the supposedly non-existent next room. And then he's physically clawed at by an arm from what should be a blank plaster wall, before the entire room 13 vanishes. Physical marks, an unprovoked assault, a room literally disappearing. How do you explain that away as just psychological distress?
Well, while that is a compelling string of details, have you perhaps considered the alternative interpretations more, thoroughly? For Sir Matthew's death, remember the physician from Barry? He initially suggested poison, and Mr. Crome's immediate suspicion was a popish plot. That points to the era's tendency, quite common, to attribute misfortune to human malice or politics, not necessarily the supernatural.
True.
And the spider-like creatures in the ash tree, certainly unsettling, yes, but could they be an unknown or maybe exaggerated species? Or even ordinary spiders appearing monstrous in the chaos and fear of a fire, especially viewed from a distance? The bishop only dared approach later, right? The skeleton inside could be an unrelated grisly find from an old burial, horrible, but not necessarily magical. And as for number 13, Anderson was demonstrably confused, misplacing his luggage, his cigarette end, suggesting a highly suggestible, agitated mental state. The lawyer's violent reaction? Perhaps influenced by Anderson's escalating panic. The clawing arm? The vanishing door? Could it be a vivid, momentary hallucination under extreme stress, or a distorted memory? especially given Anderson's earlier, seemingly mundane mistakes about his room's dimensions. And finding a coded parchment, while mysterious, suggests human secrecy for, well, any number of reasons, not necessarily proof of supernatural entities.
I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning. It feels like it systematically downplays the consistent element of malevolent intelligence and direct confrontation with entities that seem to defy natural law. What's really fascinating is how James often places these deep terrors in the most mundane, almost boring settings: a library, a hotel room, a quiet seaside town. It's as if the rational world is just this thin veneer. Look at "Oh, whistle and I'll come to you, my lad." Professor Parkins, a staunch, convinced disbeliever in the supernatural, explicitly rejecting careless talk about what you call ghosts. He finds an ancient whistle. Blowing it doesn't just induce a vision, it directly triggers a tremendous gust of wind that physically blows out his candles.
Okay.
More significantly, it summons a terrifying physical entity, described with a horrible and intensely horrible face of crumpled linen emerging from the empty bed. This creature physically sweeps its draperies across Parkins's face, tries to drag him out the window. It takes the very real physical intervention of Colonel Wilson to save him. The colonel then recognizes its danger, throws the whistle into the sea, burns the bedclothes. Parkins's subsequent lasting psychological trauma, his profound shift in views, that's not just from a bad dream or anxiety. Those feel like the indelible marks of a genuine, life-altering encounter with something malevolent, tied directly to that artifact.
While Parkins's experience is, yes, undoubtedly traumatic, the colonel's own assessment is quite telling, isn't it? He states the creature's one power was that of frightening, and that it had absolutely nothing material about it save the bedclothes. That, to me, strongly suggests a manifestation rooted in psychological terror and suggestion, possibly fueled by the eerie sound of the whistle in a lonely, windy place, especially for a man like Parkins, who, we're told, was susceptible to making pictures in his mind and had nerves. The colonel's physical intervention, while heroic, could just as easily be seen as saving Parkins from a self-induced panic attack, maybe preventing a fall, rather than wrestling a tangible demon. And the colonel's later comments about the Church of Rome and papists, they reveal a pre-existing bias that definitely colors his interpretation. The whole narrative, arguably, can be read as the breakdown of a rigidly rational mind when it's hit with highly suggestive stimuli and intense psychological pressure, ultimately manifesting its deepest fears as a ghost. It's the triumph of the unconscious, perhaps, over the consciously disbelieving intellect.
Well, we've certainly explored some compelling narratives today. Narratives that definitely challenge purely rational explanations for the uncanny. From the sacristan's repeated visceral encounters and Dennis Down's physical assault, to the multi-witnessed changing mezzotint, the physical evidence, arguably, of the spider creatures in the ash tree, the objective disappearance of number 13, and that palpable, traumatic manifestation in "Oh, whistle." These tales consistently present phenomena that, well, they defy easy dismissal as just delusion or coincidence. The sheer weight of these combined accounts, often with these corroborating details and lasting impacts, physical or psychological, it points strongly, for me, towards a world where genuine supernatural forces might actually be at play, interacting with human lives, human fears, and shaping their destinies. James's legacy, I think, is in his unsettling suggestion that the world holds far more than our senses, or maybe our science, can easily account for.
And I would maintain that while these stories are masterful, truly masterful, at creating atmosphere and psychological terror, they're also incredibly rich tapestries of human vulnerability, the enduring power of superstition, and the mind's frankly incredible capacity for illusion and maybe even self-deception. It's easy to see why they endure. They tap into that deep human need to find patterns, even supernatural ones, when we're faced with the unknown. The consistent thread, for me, remains the subjective experience of the characters, their predispositions, their anxieties, the cultural context shaping how they interpret things.
The evidence so often exists right on the fringes of perception. It's open to multiple interpretations, or it's filtered through the testimony of people already, perhaps, convinced. Ultimately, the absence of definitive, objective, scientific proof, despite the characters often trying quite rigorously to investigate, and the strong psychological patterns underlying so many of these supernatural events, it suggests that the true terror might lie not in external entities, but deep within the human psyche itself, and its susceptibility to fear and suggestion. But the material? Well, it undoubtedly leaves us with a great deal to ponder, and perhaps much more to investigate.